Well, friends, welcome back to the Space for Faith podcast. It is good to have you with us again, and I am really looking forward to who we have joining us today. Mari and Rachel are coming to us here with their new project, The Book of Belonging. And I think many of you have been introduced to this already. In fact, my guess is several of the folks who listen to this probably were a part of the Kickstarter early on. We can talk about all the emergence of this, but it is being published as a trade book here pretty soon on September 24th. It's an incredible children's Bible. And so I'm excited to get to talk to you all about it. And so, Mari and Rachel, welcome to Space for Faith podcast.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. We're so happy to be here chatting with you.
Yeah, I'm so glad to get to have you two finally on here. I've wanted to have you on here for a while, but I kept thinking like, oh, let's wait until the publication date comes. And then I kept thinking the publication date would come. And then it was like, 12 years later. And then here we are. Which
That's
is
true.
super fun.
We thought the same thing, Mike. We were waiting for that date right alongside you. It has been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Well, so we first all met each other, I think it was in 2021. And the Kickstarter project was going on, and a mutual friend, Scott Erickson, I think is who first introduced us all, and got to find out about the project that you were doing there. And the idea behind it was super inspiring, and I was so intrigued for the community of church leaders that I was connecting with and what you're putting together. And so I would love for folks to get to hear a little bit about what were the origins of the Book of Belonging? How did this start to come about?
Yeah. Well, we've shared this story before, I think with probably some of the listeners, but it started with a question from my daughter, actually. She's 10 now. At the time, she would have been 6 or 7, I guess. And it was during COVID. We're floating around in my in law's pool. And out of nowhere, she hits me with this question: Mom, does God love boys more than girls? And I was flabbergasted. I'm like, I've raised you. I thought I raised you to be a good feminist. Of course not. Of course not. Where are you getting that? And she goes on to tell me that the story Bible that she had at home, in her words, only had 2 girl stories and that the rest were about boys. And so I go home, I'm trying to, fact check her, and sure enough, there was only 2 stories and that the rest were male centric. And I just, I've been around church and Christianity long enough that it didn't shock me, I guess. The Bible skews male. Jesus is a pretty important character and he's male, so that's part of it, but I think I was still pretty surprised. And then I, did what any normal person would do, and I ordered the top 8 story Bibles on Amazon at the time, and I got a sticky note, and I went through page by page by page and took my stats on, you know, the female inclusivity, and I was kind of surprised. So 7% out of these, and this was 2020. There have been some really amazing products that have released since then. So I always try to give that caveat. Peace Table is amazing. Glennis Nellis, her book is awesome. But at the time, the top 8 story Bibles on Amazon, 7% of them had a female centric story, or 7% of the stories were female centric, if that makes sense. 19% of them had a female mentioned in the story. And when I say mentioned, I mean not just named women. That number would be a lot smaller. Like she, her, wife, daughter, any of those words I counted as a mention. Only
Okay.
19% of the stories had a female mentioned, and 23% of the pages total had a female depicted in the illustrations. Um, and I was looking through the crowds, trying to find women anywhere. It's just beards, a sea of beards, as far as I could see. Um, so I was just kind of shocked and outraged. And, it's like once I started pulling in that thread, I couldn't stop. It's like, yeah, I would really love to see some more female-centric stories. But I also, while I'm at it, it would be great to see a brown Jesus. And while I'm at it, I would love to have a story Bible that's not so much centered on this tidy morality in each story, but I would love to see something with contemplative practices, or more a center on who God says we are and who God says God is. And it's like after a while, once I had my list of asks, I kind of thought okay, I think I might just do this myself. And the rest is history. We launched on Kickstarter shortly after we met Mike, and um, Mike had you had platformed us at the Post Evangelical Collective gathering in 2021, and as we were stepping off the stage, I think you know this, this man approached us. Rachel didn't know who he was at the time, and I was completely fangirling. Jonathan Merritt was like, "Hey, can I talk to you guys really quick?" And I wasn't aware at the time that he was a literary agent. In addition to like the 10 other amazing jobs he has, I knew him as a journalist mostly, and so I thought like, "Oh, he must be writing a story." I thought he must be covering this, for one of the publications he works for. And we get out into the hallway, and he wanted to talk to us about representing us for a traditional publication, which was amazing. So the past few years have been kind of a whirlwind for us, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That's our origin story. To be not brief.
Um, I love that. No, I remember, standing there and watching Merritt just, like, beeline over to you, and I was like, "Oh, he knows a good concept when he sees it."
He's a smart
And,
man.
um oh, yeah, and he was like, "I'm not letting anybody else get over here to talk to them first." Um, yeah, we can talk about how it evolves into this other thing, but, yeah, I would curious to hear, Rachel, like, what grabbed you about this? How you got involved? Why did you wanna give time and energy to this project? Really, that in a lot of ways was just like a Kickstarter idea from I don't think you guys really knew each other before this project,
I was a
right?
stranger, yeah.
Right. So you get set up on, like, a blind date essentially to illustrate this Bible. Like, what took you in enough that you would give up your time on this, like, random Kickstarter project?
There was definitely some value alignment there for me. I had come out of just a many, many years deconstruction and then big pause on Christianity, on touching the Bible, on engaging with any of this stuff. There was a lot of hurt there, a lot of grief, and getting comfortable with being okay with that. And just before Mari emailed me, I was beginning to crave handling these stories again, picking them up in my hands and sketching about them. I think drawing, I use it sort of as a form of meditation or a way to process through my feelings. I talk about pictures as pilgrimage, and I get to send out these characters on adventures. I get to practice being brave on the page before I actually have to go do it out in the world. And I had been learning about all these lovely sacred practices, some that were centered in my tradition, these contemplative practices, some that were rabbinical practices, to this lovely podcast that uses these practices, but with secular texts. And I was starting to think, wait, but could I just use these with the Bible again? Like, am I ready for that? And I was sort of craving it. And then Mari cold emailed me. Our friend Scott connected us, so she wasn't totally a rando. She had Scott's recommendation, and I was hesitant. I, at that time, was very, very hesitant about taking any sort of requests from churches. I had like this series of Narnia prints that people really, really loved, and I had done some faith related stuff, and I was still getting asks about that stuff. And I would kind of, most of the time, I said, nah, I'm not working with a church, or I need to see like your statement of inclusion on LGBTQ stuff. Like, you need to, I was like, you guys have resources. You have so many resources. Like, you don't need an artist to be underpaid to make you more stuff if you're not being inclusive. And so I sent Mari a polite email saying like, hey, I'm Rachel. Here are my boundaries. I don't believe in biblical inerrancy. I'm actually no longer calling myself a Christian, but interested in this between space and wanting to help people like me who might want to continue to engage in process or who might want to come back. Because Christianity wasn't off the table for me. I just didn't feel like I needed to mask anymore and say like, I still am. I'm just deconstructing. It's like, it's okay. I don't have to use this word. And that's where how it started. And Mari emailed back. In my head, now knowing Mari, imagined it was all caps, but she probably wasn't because we were just getting to know each other professionally. But she was like, I was about to grill you in the same way with these questions. So that felt like a really lovely fit. And then some logistical stuff. Mari was willing to pay me a living wage to do that work, which I think was also really refreshing because oftentimes I do a lot of work with small businesses, with religious institutions, people with a big idea, and most of the time they don't have the willingness or the budget. So the fact that Mari was willing to pay me out of pocket for concepts we really kicked it off and we're excited about very similar stuff. And then there's to be a Kickstarter. Like if it went well, like then I would also get paid. So it just felt like win-win-win getting to do this values aligned thing and still get paid to do it. Because I was really working on that also for myself personally and my family.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that value system, Mari, that, how it played out in the way that, like, not only in what you were creating in the book, but in the way that, like, you were treating the person that you were working with on it, like, there's so much to be said about that, about, like, not just, saying, like, "Oh, I want to present things differently in this book," but also I wanna treat the people differently who are working on this book with me, like, that's, um yeah, great kudos to you for that.
Oh,
Uh
thanks. That's so kind. Thank you.
So, like, I'm trying to figure out, and you all probably have some experience with this. Like, it's such a beautiful book. And obviously, we were just saying, like, this is an audio only podcast. And I was trying to figure out, like, how do I describe this to people? Like, how do people understand what it is to, like, have, I'm holding the book right now for everyone who can't see, which is everyone. Um, like, how are you all like talking about like how this the experience of this particular children's Bible?
Rachel, I'm gonna let you jump in and do all of, like, the artsy words, and then, like,
Mhm.
I have some, like, big picture stuff I'd love to talk about, but for, like, the people who are visual people, like, I want Rachel to use all the important words.
Yeah.
Sure. I like to lead with, she's thick. Like, I am very proud of both of us for the amount of content and resources that are in this 24.95 or whatever publication. Hardback, she has lots to give, and I'm really, really proud of that. There's, what is it, 42 stories from the Old and New Testament. Every dang page has pictures on it. That was important to us as well. Mari is just a magical, poetic writer, and it was really fun to weave the pictures throughout that, and that was a value for us both too, to make sure that the pictures and the images were working together, but sometimes doing different jobs. So sometimes Mari wouldn't have to say something, I could show it, or we were thinking about age range, and the age range for the words themselves might be a little more in the elementary school years ish. And I wanted in whole families, like little biddies who are sitting in laps or don't have the attention span to stick around for a 6-page story, to have things to look at and to tell them stories about as well. So that's woven in the pictures as well. I love to sometimes think about what's the story playing under the story here, and what are some fun little jokes I can tuck in or questions for the kids to continue to explore after. So that's a little bit about like the art direction of the book. It has these just beautifully written stories by Mari from this focus of identity, contemplation, and wonder, with these themes of knowing that God finds you beloved, belonging, delightful. And something else that we have interspersed after some stories are these wonder moments and these mindful moments. And those are opportunities for grown-ups and their kiddos and their lives to pause and take this very text heavy, word driven and visual driven thing and move it out of our head and into their bodies and make it practice. So there's some really lovely practices there for kids to do. And then also moments to encourage questioning and wonder and mystery, which I think is really, really essential for people of this faith to embrace in order for us to survive and to stop killing the world and people's little spirits. So giving kids and their recovering grown-ups opportunities to be okay with the uncomfiness of questions and encouraging wonder was a huge piece for us. And I love that Mari has these moments throughout where she models how to do that. She encourages questioning. So I think that pretty much is an overview of thick book, lots of stories, some practices throughout, tons of pictures.
I like that you say she's thick.
She's thick. Well, what I was gonna add, was that when we talk about the illustrations, 2 things that I hope people notice, because Rachel worked so hard and so put so much thought and tender loving kindness into is um kind of like you were talking about, Mike, that there's these values built into the book and that we want them to trickle down to every aspect of the book. So if we're going to use words like belonging and inclusion and diversity and representation to talk big picture, Rachel did a really wonderful job of pouring all of those values into the illustrations themselves. So like if you look at any crowd of people in the book, and poor Rachel was like, why did Jesus speak to so many crowds? Because she had to draw so many crowds of people. But you will notice diversity, inclusion, representation in every single one of those pictures. There's diversity on every level of like body size, shape, skin tone, ability, which is a big one for story Bibles. You'll see nursing mothers, you'll see pregnant mothers, you'll see old people, you'll see the diversity that we know to be inherent in the family of God. Rachel has done such a beautiful job of showing it on every page. So I think that's a really key thing. And another thing that she really poured her heart into, and it actually was a battle at times with our publisher, is she made the decision, or we did together, to depict God, which, as far as I know, hasn't been done in a story Bible before. And I will admit, I was a little hesitant at first, and Rachel, I'll let her talk about it because she speaks really eloquently to it. She really won me over because she speaks so eloquently about it. But she was really committed to this idea of not keeping God as this sort of like off page, distant, airy entity that no one can quite even talk about or think about because it's so off limits and like almost taboo. And she really like created this diverse collection of imagery to represent God. And like we have language in the introduction to sort of like ease families into it that, like, of course, no one knows what God looks like. No one has seen God, but we know what God is like. So, you may see God depicted as a mother bird because that's how God is described in the Psalms. You may see God depicted in this way or that way. And sort of we ease them into it and we use the phrase that it's a true image for your mind to rest on while your heart does the important work of learning to trust God. Um, Rachel, could you talk a little bit about give your spiel that convinced me
Well,
because I love
I
it.
felt really strongly about this. One, just to enter into this with humility, I don't think that we're trying to be the end all perfect storybook Bible. We are contributing to the liturgy. I'm part of a tradition, a long tradition of writing about these scriptures and also some super awkward art about Jesus and the people of God. Like I love some medieval art. And I said, listen, we have so much here to work with actually. And I think my tradition, I came from a Protestant background, sometimes I think leaned a little too hard in the other direction and seeing maybe imagery as idolatrous or presumptuous in some way. And as someone who inherited a really, really disembodied faith, and a participant in purity culture who is healing from that, of thinking that bodies and human bodies and female bodies are dirty, that to be flowy and spirit and airy is what we're aiming for to keep things in our head. All of that I think it's just sort of corrosive. And maybe in 3 decades, we will need I think it's just what do we need to lean into right now? And I thought that at this moment, I want kids and their grown-ups to remember that their bodies are good. And when we say that we're made in the image of God, wouldn't it be lovely if we showed God taking on some of these physical characteristics of a person, a God that hugs, a God that smiles, a God that sometimes looks like a woman, sometimes more androgynous or like a man that has hands that can hold, that shows emotions, but then also referencing some of these other images of God, like a bird. We have more sparkly, flowy God as wind showing up in those pages. But I really wanted to lean into that with humility and say, this is an icon. This is not the truth of a thing. This is a representation of a thing. And I think it's more helpful for us to hold that loosely and have something to work with than to just make God off camera the whole time. And I think that's something that a lot of us have felt in our lives and almost leading into like, I don't know, I had a lot of language like, how's your relationship with Jesus? Like, what's your relationship like? But it's sort of divorced from these like helpful functional things to make it feel relational. I think that's just its own thing that we could go into. But yeah, I was healing and wanted to imagine God. When we see it, there's so much precedent for this in scripture. God walks in the garden, God appears as fire, God taking on flesh in Christ. There's plenty of scriptural precedent. And I felt fine with, we have a little, like Mari said, a disclaimer at the beginning of the story saying, like, yeah, we don't actually think God is yellow and sparkly. Um, but that is the imagery that we're going to use in this book so that there's some continuity and you can explore what that brings in.
Rachel, I don't know if I've actually ever told you this, but when you're talking about, we know that God's not yellow and sparkly. So my middle daughter, Noah, her favorite color is yellow. And Rachel knows this. She had surgery a few months ago and she was pretty scared about it. And so as we were preparing for her surgery, we're in the hospital and she's in her gown. And, I was pretty tender in that moment too. Sending your kid into an operating room is a pretty tender thing. And I was telling her, oh, I think I can get through this. I was telling her, I can't go with you into the room, but they had a child life specialist there. Alicia's gonna go with you. It's gonna be fine. You're gonna take a little nap. So I'm sort of preparing her. And then I'm telling her, like, but you know that God goes with you. God goes with you wherever I can't. Um, and we had been looking through the book of belonging, and she was really into Rachel did this one illustration of the tabernacle, and she has the presence of God over the tabernacle as this sort of vaguely bird-like, sparkly yellow, I don't know, shape. And Noah has loved that illustration from the get-go, I think because it's yellow and sparkly. That's her favorite color. And so I was saying, like, let's imagine God going with you. When you close your eyes and think about that, what do you see? And she's like, a yellow eagle. And I'm like, a yellow eagle. And she's telling me that she pictures this yellow eagle flying over her with its wings out. And then she's like, there's the blue eagle and I think the other one was red eagle too. And I'm like, tell me, tell me more about this. I'm thinking like my kid's a genius. She understands the Trinity. And she's like, no, the blue eagle is dad. The red eagle is you. And the yellow eagle is God who flies over all of us. And I just like was so delighted and touched by that because, if I'm being honest, I agreed with Rachel to do this, and I did think it was the right call to have depictions of God in the book. But, I have my own doubts and I was raised fundamentalist, so I have a lot of like I say that I have a scandalized fundamentalist who sits on one of my shoulders and like squawks pretty loud when I do certain things. And it was squawking pretty loud about depicting God, but I just like, here's a real life case study of like, here's my child who's terrified, going through like a pretty major life situation. And she feels such deep peace and comfort because of a picture that Rachel put in her Bible to help her feel, like Rachel said, like, if we want our kids to have a trusting relationship with God, what better thing for us to do than to give them like, little imagination handholds to get there. And like, she did that and it was beautiful for her. And like, I could go on and on. She had a dream about angels while she was under anesthesia. It was incredible. The whole experience was as good as, a pediatric surgery could be. But I just was so thankful in that moment. I'm like, thank God for Rachel for pushing this. And it just like provided such a profound spiritual moment for both of us.
Oh, I didn't know that, Mari. That means so much to me.
That's really sweet. I love that. And yeah, I mean, I think that there's like I love the precedent that you're drawing on, Rachel, not only from the scriptures, but I even think of like when I heard you all were doing this, I don't remember if you said this or like if somebody said this to me or if it was in my own brain. So I don't want to take credit for something that wasn't mine. But like I was thinking of Michelangelo's in the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling where you've got the famous picture, right, of God's hand reaching out to Adam and it's obviously God as an old white man hand reaching out. But it does give this like tangible like moment of like, oh, God is like reaching towards and it gives you something tactile almost to kind of hold on
Mhm.
to and to in that same tradition say like, okay, well, what if we imagine it in other ways? What if we imagine God, because God is constantly depicted through these different metaphors? What if we imagine God through those metaphors and allow other metaphors to be other kinds of like handholds for us that like in some sort of way move us beyond yeah, the idea of you kept saying, God being off the page and like how God moves onto the page. There's something really interesting about that. So I was curious for both of you about like just kind of the working on this, that it's like, it's this like really interesting children's Bible that's so beautiful, so thoughtful, so like fun to read. My kids are older, but like I still bought several copies. And by the way, like, friends who are listening, like, I will always buy copies of books like this for, like, for multiple reasons. Like, one, like, I wanna have a copy of a book like this. Like, I always want to, like, for myself to read it. I always also want to buy copies because I want, if there are books like this that I wanna see more of published, then I need to indicate to, like, publishers that, like, that these are worth buying, and then I always wanna have books like this to be able to give as gifts, and so we were able to give one of them to some friends of ours who recently adopted a kid, and like for their adoption party we got to give a book
I love
of
that.
belonging, which was so fun for us and for them to get that. um but I was curious, like, as you're engaging in this and you're writing these children's stories and you're depicting these stories, like, did that do anything in you, like, as you are wrestling through this stuff in different kinds of ways? I'm curious, like, what sort of happened in you in doing that?
I see Rachel laughing as you're listening, and I feel it I'm assuming that she's thinking of she has had quite the transformation throughout the process, so I think I'll let her go
Mm,
first in case she's gonna say what I'm thinking I'll say.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I First off, it was just really healing to get to take on the role of storyteller alongside Mari and student. We learned from so many new people who were so different from the people that I was being taught by a few years previous. Wonderful scholars that helped us dig deeper into these stories. But getting to tell it, getting to put myself in the role of storyteller rather than I'm sitting in a chair and a pew at church and someone's telling me the right way or their like reformed theology way or, from a specific lens, to get to do that with Mari was really deeply healing, and it made me connect with the characters in a very new and vivid way. And hearing Mari's writing about it, which she's done so much research and there's so much like lovely different ideas and theological concepts that are woven in, and to see that playfully written about and kindly written about was transformative for me. And then yeah, getting to imagine what these characters were feeling, that Ignatian spiritual practice of coming in and like trying to put myself in the shoes of a character made me fall in love with stories that I just had become really two-dimensional plastic, sometimes, painful for me to hear or think about. Um, like the crucifixion was one, like, that is a story that I've heard so many times that I did jump ropes for Jesus, and I had to
Oh
memorize
my
John
gosh.
3:16, and I know what you're supposed to get out of this. I'm like, "For God so loved the world." That's me jump roping and reciting my catechism. And it's like there's something there, you're being sold something here. It's like you need to get the point of the story. And to get to read that with fresh eyes was so powerful, so beautiful, so heartbreaking. And for me, I really experienced that story through the eyes of Mary, and that's another huge transformation during this project. Was from I went through a miscarriage, a pregnancy, and postpartum all during this book. And, becoming a mother was amazing, but I had a lot of physical and mental health complications, particularly after, right when it was time for me to really start drawing the picture. And so I was in a place on this book also where I felt very, very far from my intuition. I was moving really slowly, like it was hard. And I think what was also transformative about this project was really falling in love with Mari as a creative partner and friend, us becoming such good friends, and being able to invite her into my process and ask her to sometimes be my intuition. Like knowing that she knows me well enough that when I'm like, I really can't tell, or I've got major brain fog, can you tell me like which direction you think I should take this? Normally I joke and I say, like, if I'm showing someone something, I'll say, like, I don't really want your feedback. Like, I've got this. I know what direction I want to take this in. And Mari is someone that I trusted to offer feedback in process And yeah, she really got me through it, uh, especially with just a lot of like ADHD executive dysfunction stuff that was going on for me in the midst of postpartum depression and everything else. She just got me through it. And it gave me space also to take so much pain and grief and longing and shame. Like it is all in the pictures. I poured that into those pictures and it made me identify with those characters in a new way. I like to use Sarah as an example because at the beginning of the project, Mari and I were like, ah, Abraham and Sarah, like, ugh, like this is so icky. Like this is an important story, but we were thinking more about the woman called Hagar, and it was just hard to think about that story. But then after having a miscarriage, I was able to have empathy for Sarah and to remember that feeling of, oh,
Mhm.
waiting for something, hoping for something, and finally getting it and being really, really afraid that it's going to be taken away. And I think I ended up identifying with a lot of characters like that too, who were longing and waiting. Poor Hannah. And her her being honored for throwing herself and her emotions out there. And I think that those characters really um transformed me as well. And like stuff even we joke like the prodigal son. Wow, I've heard that one a million times. And I'm just crying, drawing, like thinking about the dad and like, "Of course, your baby boy," and I think there are a couple moments like that in the stories where I'm seeing adult parents and adult children, and I'm just now thinking about my baby boy and going, "Oh, he will always be my baby boy," and what would that feel like to see him hurt, crucified, making poor choices, and running away from me? I'd never seen that, bunny book that's, like, by the person who does Goodnight Moon. If you I don't know if you've seen another one of her bunny books, and it's like, "If you become a fish, I will become a fisherman, and I will fish you out of there," like, "If you run away, I'll come catch you," and it's very prodigal son, and that one hit me really hard, so long story long, it made me love scripture again.
Mm.
It was very healing. It made me love Mari, and I said, "I'm never doing creative work alone, period." And, um, yeah, it made me think more about my role as a mother and my relationship with grief and pain. Big old Enneagram 7, that big path of transformation for me as well.
So good, Rachel. I echo everything she says actually, because I mean, that's the thing about being so collaborative on a creative project like this was like when Rachel was grieving, I was doing some grieving too. When she's sobbing over a picture, I'm sobbing over it too. Like we really did pour our heart and soul into this project. Sometimes by choice, sometimes through the circumstances that we were going through at the time. I think for me, what was most transformational was I mentioned it briefly, but I grew up fundamentalist. And as a woman participating in what I would consider the tradition of midrash, of retelling scripture through a different lens and drawing a different conclusion than has been told before, um, that would have been taboo for me growing up. Speaking with authority on scripture would have been off limits to me. Every time I go up on stage to talk about this book and I see men in the audience, like that's a big deal for little me. A few weeks ago, we went up to South Bend City Church, who I know we all adore. They've been so supportive through this project, and I was delivering some books. It's a couple hours from where I live, so I brought my whole family, and we delivered the books in person. It was really wonderful to see their kidsmen and stuff. But Jason, the pastor, invited me up on stage to talk about the book. Um, and they don't have a pulpit; they have a sacred carpet because they're very cool. But going up and standing on a sacred carpet, on stage at a church was a big deal for me, and it's never lost on me. But then I looked out into the audience and, all 3 of my kids were lined up, my 2 daughters and my son. I could see their little faces tipped up towards me, and I just had this, like, full body experience of, like, such, um, like, brutiful, to use that Glennon Doyle term, like, brutal beauty, this, like, brutiful gratitude of, like, "Oh my gosh," like, in this moment, I'm being what I needed when I was younger, I'm embodying for my kids these things that I've told them their whole life, that like everyone belongs in the love of God. Like, you don't have any less Holy Spirit in you than your brother. Like, these were things I needed to hear when I was younger, and to step on stage into that, into, this whole project started because Ada asked me, does God love boys more than girls? And to get on stage and to answer her with this project and with my actual presence in my life, to say, no, God doesn't. Like, look at your mom, look at your mom, this like a woman of color standing on stage talking with authority on scripture and interpretation and theology. Like, that has been so transformational for me to heal a lot of, I think, maybe some of the untrue things I believed about myself growing up as a woman, but also transformational as a parent, to be like, okay, we actually get to live into these things that we're telling our kids. They're not these far off, lofty concepts. Like, we get to live into them, we get to embody them. And in that way, like, that is the way of Jesus, right? Is to embody the things that we know to be true about who God is and who God says that we are. So that was just like, I still get chills. I still weep every time I think
Mm.
about that. Especially, I forgot one piece of it. We then afterwards, we're out in the lobby just chatting with people about the book, and this man came up to Ada, my daughter, and he's like, "You're Ada, right?" And she's kind of mystified. She's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Will you sign my book?" And it was just this special moment, and she's like, "Yeah." Like, she was like, she's a theater girl, so she loved the attention. But then he's like, he starts encouraging her, and like, we're all weeping. He's like, "I know you're proud of your mom, but I hope you're proud of yourself too. Like, this is why we need children. We need you guys to ask these questions." So, like, we as adults, we get stuck in our ways. Like, we don't realize what we like, forget what's important. But kids, they ask us these questions, and they force us to confront it, and they force us to 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 make what's needed in the world. Man, he just like spoke all this truth over her and then asked for her signature. And I just like, it just felt like such a full circle moment, like the story of God written across my life, of like, not only do I get to be who I needed when I was younger, and to heal some of that, like, I would say like generational misnaming of what women are, but also that, like, then my daughter gets to step into this as part of God's story over my life and her life as well, was just like unbelievable. It's transformed me in every way. I can't believe I get to do this.
Hmm. I There's so many things about that that I love. Like, I mean, I love obviously what owning this project means for you and for like your kids seeing you do that. I also love what it means for like me and other folks. Like, we need your voice, and so like I need to learn from you. And if you weren't doing this work, like I would be missing something. And so like we're all beneficiaries of the fact that like you are stepping into this like special unique calling that like I'm really grateful for that. And one of the things that was interesting to me, and I was super curious to ask you about, Mari, that like maybe is a little bit nerdy, but like Rachel had these like really interesting ideas around the decision to depict God in some ways. You made some interesting decisions as a writer and as a translator as well. And one of them is that, like, I don't know if I'd seen this before in a children's Bible. Like, I've seen it in single author translations of the Bible, but in a children's Bible, that you chose to use like original language names. So you chose to use not necessarily like the English translation name, but like the Hebrew translation name or the Hebrew transliteration name. I'm curious about like why you made decisions like that cause you to engage with the story in a different kind of way.
Yeah. Oh, I love this question. No one's asked us this before. That was something that was brought to my attention by so we Rachel touched on it briefly, but we had a panel of advisors who worked on this book with us, just this incredible group of people. And one of them, her name is Elle Grover Fricks. Some people might be familiar with her from the Bema Discipleship Project podcast. She's one of their hosts. And so she acted as our Hebrew language expert, and she at one point had asked, like, "Hey, are you guys planning to use the anglicized versions of the names or the originals?" And with all the studying and research I had done ahead of time, that had really not occurred to me too much. And I was like, I think the anglicized ones. Why?" And she sent me this really thoughtful essay she had typed up about she views the anglicized names as a form of erasure over over the brown people that the Bible was written by, to, and for, to remove that element of like their mother tongue being spoken for the ease of English speakers. Um, so she brought it up and she was so gentle and kind about it, but like this could be an act of justice for the book. And in kids literature, and I saw it also from the lens of in kids literature, they often say that a good children's book has both windows and mirrors. That a window being the idea that like a kid could look through a window into a world they've never been a part of, whether it's like Narnia or like, I don't know, a country they don't live in, and see something that is unfamiliar to them, and therefore not only grow their imagination but their empathy. But there should all should be mirrors that it reflects back to a child who they are and what's valuable and beloved about them. In the Book of Belonging, we had already done some of the work for mirrors, like representation was a huge value for us. But Elle pointed out, like, you have to make sure the windows that you're giving are actual windows and not almost like a filtered window, if that makes sense.
Huh.
Like, sure, you can see into this place, but through the lens of like an Americanized view. And so, what better way to show kids that, like, the Bible was not written um, by or for Americans. It was written by and for brown people living in the Middle East in a context, an ancient context that is completely foreign to you. It's not ours, it's theirs, and we get to benefit from it and borrow it, but it's not ours. And she gave the example of um, if I hear the name Paul, I think of like a white finance bro with blonde hair and like, I don't know, a fleece zip up vest. When I hear the name Paulos, the non anglicized version, I immediately think of, you know, a man with dark, curly hair, brown skin, living in a place that is not entirely familiar to me. And that's a good position, I think, to put kids in as they're considering these texts of like, yes, God is for me and I'm a part of God's story no matter who I am. But also, like, I can respect these stories from the appropriate distance to learn from them and to learn from the people that they were written by and for. And I think it just really lends itself to a posture of wonder and mystery that we're trying to encourage in this book that, like, I think it takes certainty off the table in a way that's really healthy and wonderful for kids as they're learning to trust God. If it's not something that they feel like they already own and know and that's written for them specifically, in a way, I think a certain degree of that is actually really healthy for them to see it as something that they're learning from and observing from the distance of time and also geography. To know that, I think actually like puts them in a posture of learning and reverence in a way that I think a lot of us probably need. We need some humbling in that area that, like, yeah, we know a lot about the Bible, but there's so much that we can't even begin to understand because of like just cultural context. Like, we cannot begin as a non-Hebrew speaker. There are concepts that I can only study from a distance. That's not, you know, it's not in my bones and marrow. It's not in the place that I was born. It's not in my place of belonging. It's not in my heritage. And I think that um, ultimately has served our audience really well.
That's so super fascinating. I've never heard anybody talk about it in that kind of way, and it makes a ton of sense. And it's really a interesting way to yeah, to have another way to cause us to, like, have new and different images, um, to see things differently, to experience it. Like, my experience had always been I'd never actually, asked why a bunch of single author translations had done that. I had just always experienced it as like, "Oh, it causes me to engage the text differently, and I kinda like that." And I hadn't, thought about it as an act of justice. I hadn't thought about it as like, "Oh, what's it doing in the way that I'm viewing things?" And even then for well, I was gonna say my kids are young adults now, so a bit different, but even for them too, to, like, in the
Yeah.
way that they think about and engage the scriptures.
Yeah. I mean, like, if, like, for a young adult, even, like, if you're like reading the verses that were weaponized against a lot of us for purity culture, if you hear them spoken from someone named Paul, it's easy to start thinking about sexual ethic in terms of what
Hmm,
a Western, white, um, mostly monogamous sexual ethic entails. Whereas if you're thinking about these verses that are often spoken by Paul and weaponized against people from an author named Paulos. It's easy to create sort of that, I think, like, experiential and, conceptual space of, "Oh, wait, this might have been written for and by people who are in a completely different context from me, where, like, their culture may have certain things may have been normalized in their culture that I can't even begin to understand. I wonder what they're actually talking about," and then it sort of opens the conversation up for that, which I think is important,
Hmm.
even for young adults, yeah.
That's great. No, that's actually really helpful. All right, so there's a couple of questions that I was curious about, if you wouldn't mind sharing. Like the first was in the Kickstarter book that you sent out. There's a little note in it that says something to the effect of, I'll probably get it wrong. I wish I would have brought it
Mhm.
in here with me. It says something to the effect of like you changed our the trajectory of our careers has changed or something like that. I mean, I would love to hear a little bit about like, okay, what happened with this project. And I'm even, yeah, I'm thinking about like, yeah, the narrative of your own sort of story arc, your personal story arc that like now is like shifting in different directions.
Yeah, it's been kind of amazing. Um, I mean, even just, like even the parts of my story that Mike, like, going from being a mom, I was working a marketing job and thinking, "I'm gonna create this thing for my kids. This is something that I want for my kids." And then, it blossomed to, like, some of my friends' kids and then the Kickstarter. To the point where, like, 3 short years later, like, Scott Erickson, like, we're texting. Like, I was reading his book when I had the idea for it, and now he's a good friend that I adore, and, like, I'm emailing with Sarah Bessie about, like, going on her new like, it's just mind-boggling to me when I think about it that just, like, in terms of, m my world, I guess, has grown, has opened up in ways that I really didn't see coming. I thought, I'm gonna make this book for my kids. I'm gonna print some extra copies. I'm gonna keep them in my garage. People can contact me if they want to buy them. And now to the point where, like, we're published with the biggest publisher in the world, having conversations with some of our heroes. We got an email the other day that they might want us on Good Morning America, and Rachel and I are both just like, what happened? Like, wasn't it just yesterday that we were, like, struggling to make a budget that we could both pay for childcare if we could just get enough people interested in this book? It has transformed every aspect of my life, and, Rachel, I'm curious what you would say.
Yeah, I think that being invited to the table in this conversation now, writing and drawing and talking about this was a very personal thing for me. I was posting about it sometimes on Instagram, but I that my grief, my processing, my collaboration, all the podcasts, all the angst have contributed to making something that will be healing and transformative for others has been so mind-boggling. And yeah, that like I get to have conversations with some of the coolest people now and maybe actually get to make a difference in the world. I've been feeling pretty low and anxious lately, honestly. And just having a hard time. I've just moved to part-time instead of full-time. So I'm with my son in the afternoons, which I'm loving, but I'm struggling to figure out how to manage my energy and my time and stuff. And I was feeling pretty weepy about it and be like, why am I still stuck in these same dumb patterns? And I'm like learning a lot about ADHD now and a course to help me. But I did look up and I said, you know what? I do know that regardless of what's going on in my life and what's happening right now, I think I'm making a tangible difference in the world. Like this dumpster fire that is American Christian nationalism, which is contributing to injustice and horrible policies. And just to get on my soapbox for a minute, like this one perspective has done so much damage. And I'm scared about what's going to happen in November and the future of the world for my child. And I have it in my instruction. I'll read it here. I dedicated the book to my baby son, who I was like, I don't even know if I'm going to read this to him. Like, we'll just see where we are with spirituality. But I put for Finn these pictures. I started making these pictures before I even met you, imagining the world I wanted to give to you. And then you grew inside me as I grew this book. This world isn't quite as kind or safe as I'd like, but I want you to know that your mommy tried hard to make it better, not only for you, but also for other kids and their grown-ups, and most especially for the in-betweeners, lost sheep, and wandering ones. We all belong. Yeah, and I think that's been really cool about it. It's changed my career. Like, I'm going to get to help. And Scott and Jonathan and our team of advisors and people like you, Mike, help put jet fuel on this project. Like, there are way, way more talented illustrators than me in the world who would not have um, thrashed around for 4 months trying to figure out the color palette for this. But I get to be at the table and I get to make pictures that will hopefully have a lasting impact on generation or more of people. And that feels really good.
You're making such a significant impact with this. And I think I told it might have been you, Rachel, the last time that I saw you both when we were in Raleigh. Um, I said, like, I think not only is this significant, like I think that this the book of belonging is really significant and it's really important, but I think it's also going to create a sort of like uh a marked departure of other folks that are going to create new and different like children's books, bibles, other sorts of things that that they're going to see what's happened with this, and not only the kind of resonance that they're going to have with it, but even like, gosh, how many times has it been at the top of the pre-order sales list on Amazon? So they're gonna see also, like, the kind of commercial success with it and be like, "Oh, that you're trailblazing a pathway that others are gonna follow in," which, like, I hope that you get a chance to, like, bask in some of the beauty and goodness of that, like, not only of what this book is, but even the kind of wake that's gonna get to come out of this, I think is really special and important.
Oh, I hope so. Man, you're making me cry, Mike. Like, that's something I've been saying lately is like, it really does feel like at this point that it's not our book anymore. I don't know if Rachel feels that way, but like, it truly doesn't. That feels like a thing you say during marketing, but I really do mean it. Like, it doesn't feel like it's our book anymore. It feels like there's this bigger thing going on. Like the spirit is up to something. And I am just like flabbergasted, but also so honored that Rachel and I got to be a part of it, that we get to be a piece of whatever it is that's going on. That just feels like such an incredible honor, but also like so wonderful and fitting also for the way that things are moving. I'm like, I mean, Rachel talking about how like having a miscarriage and being pregnant and having postpartum depression, how that pain made her art that much more beautiful and that much more honoring to the character of God. I'm like, this is why we need more women in leadership. This is why I'm so thrilled that we're seeing that pattern, because like voices like Rachel's and talent like Rachel's and ethos like Rachel's pouring into these drawings, that's new, but that's something that's so needed. I think it's a perspective that the world desperately needs right now, even to start a conversation about belonging. I think it's like it's a buzzword for a reason. It's become a buzzword because I think so many people are longing for it in the time and age that we're living in. And I think elevating women's voices, and I'm so glad that we get to be some of those voices, is working positively towards that. And I'm just thrilled to be a part of it.
Well, friends, I hope that you catch some of the spirit of this really beautiful book, and I hope that you'll pick it up. It comes out September 24th, the Book of Belonging, and I hope that you'll order it, get a few copies for yourself and to give away to some others. And where can people be paying attention to you all and all of the great stuff that not only are you putting out with this, but like I'm sure there's going to be a lot more great stuff that's going to come that people want to be paying attention to.
So you can find us on social media. My handle is at Mariko Clark, MarikoClark. Rachel's is at rachel.eleanor.art. And we've been trying to invest more in our Substack lately, just giving sort of behind the scenes glimpses. And even like when you were asking about the non-anglicized names, like we have a post about that's coming up to just sort of like give insight into the book even after you may have purchased it and read it. So keep an eye out there. So that's the bookofbelonging.substack.com.
Fantastic. Genuinely, what a gift to have you two here today. I'm really grateful. I'm grateful for the work that you've done. I'm grateful that our paths have crossed, and I can't wait to see, not only to get to see the book out in the world more, but to get to see the wake that it creates as well. So thanks for making some time today.
Thanks, Mike. That's so kind. And thank you for everything you've done to platform us, platform the book, and just champion us through the entire process. It's been so lovely.
Thank you so, so much.